All right, so today we're diving into a pretty powerful editorial. It breaks down a very recent and incredibly direct confirmation of U.S. covert action in Venezuela. Now, this isn't speculation or some kind of rumor. We're talking about an admission that really changes the game. So let's get right into it.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the exact statement that kicked off this whole discussion. Then we'll put it into some historical context, which is super important here. After that, we'll examine the official reasons given versus what the source claims are the real motives. And finally, we'll see what kind of solutions are being proposed.
Okay, let's jump right into the heart of the matter. This entire editorial, this whole conversation, it all comes from a surprisingly frank confirmation right from the top of the U.S. government.
The source calls this a brazen admission, and for good reason. I mean, this isn't a leak or some anonymous tip. It's a direct confirmation. The editorial makes the case that this action just dramatically escalates an already super tense situation. It really threatens to destabilize the whole region by, trampling on some fundamental principles of international law. Now, to really get the full impact of this admission, the piece argues you can't just look at it in a vacuum. This action is seen as just the latest chapter in a much longer and, frankly, much darker history of U.S. intervention in Latin America.
The source uses that phrase, grim historical pattern, and it really hits home. It suggests that, look, these kinds of operations, they're nothing new. And historically, they've led to some pretty catastrophic results across the region, stuff like long-term instability and the complete erosion of democratic institutions.
And the editorial points to some key examples to back this up. You've got the 1954 coup in Guatemala, the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, the U.S. backing of the 1973 coup in Chile, and the funding of the Contra Wars in Nicaragua. The author's point is that these aren't just footnotes in a history book. These events left deep scars and created this profound, lasting mistrust of U.S. foreign policy all throughout Latin America.
Okay, so keeping all that history in mind, what's the official reason for these covert ops today? Well, this is where the editorial's argument gets really sharp, and it uncovers a pretty major conflict.
The Trump administration put a few key reasons on the table. First, the influx of Venezuelan refugees. Second, claims of widespread drug trafficking. And third, and this is a big one, they've specifically labeled President Maduro a narco-terrorist. According to the editorial, these justifications have been used to just keep ramping up the pressure on the Venezuelan government.
But here is the absolute kicker. It seems there's a major disagreement inside the U.S. government itself. That political claim, that Maduro is a narco-terrorist, has, as the source reports, been directly contradicted by the administration's own intelligence agencies.
And we're not talking about a simple workplace disagreement here. This internal conflict allegedly had some really serious consequences. The piece reports that a director at the National Intelligence Council was actually fired because he refused to change his agency's assessment to match the political story. That's a pretty explosive claim, right?
So if the official reasons are being challenged from inside the U.S. government, the editorial asks a really direct question. What's really driving this policy? What are the true motives here?
This is really the central question the source is trying to answer. It argues that to find the real reasons, you have to look past the press releases and dig into the deeper economic and geopolitical stuff. So what's actually going on here?
And here they are, the motives the editorial puts forward. First and foremost, control. Control over Venezuela's absolutely massive petroleum reserves and their huge natural gas deposits. We're talking some of the largest in the world. But it's also about geopolitics. The desire to counter the influence of rivals like Russia and China in what the U.S. considers its backyard, and to push back against Venezuela's close relationship with Cuba.
But this editorial doesn't just criticize, it also tries to offer a solution. So let's take a look at the path forward it suggests as an alternative to all this covert action.
Now, before getting to the solution, the source makes a really important distinction. It says, hey, you can absolutely criticize the Maduro government for its authoritarian moves and for mismanaging the economy. But those failures do not give anyone a legal or moral green light for an illegal foreign intervention.
So what's the alternative? The editorial lays out a three-step path. Step 1, the international community needs to resist these kinds of Cold War-era regime change policies. Step 2, actively push for diplomatic solutions that actually support the real democratic forces inside Venezuela. And Step 3, which is probably the most important, you have to respect Venezuela's sovereignty and its fundamental right to decide its own future.
And that really brings us to the big question hanging over this whole analysis.
You know, it's a line that can get pretty blurry in international politics, but it's a line that this editorial argues has been clearly crossed. When does intervention become aggression? It's a critical question, and definitely one worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.